Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here to speak in this debate with such important and renowned commentators on this important issue. I want to make three fairly simple points in the time that I have. Firstly, that drones are different from other weapons, and they have a particular ethical problem in that they lower the cost of engaging in lethal military action, perhaps on a day-to-day basis, but primarily on a kind of global strategic level. The second issue is that I want to argue that we shouldn't be kind of caught up, swallowed up in the claims of defense company spokespeople who argue that drones are pinpoint, precise, accurate weapons, and that drone warfare is like some kind of inverse version of the Rapture, where we can just simply take away the bad guys magically, and all the good guys, all the innocent people are left behind. And thirdly, I want to make the point and to challenge the idea that Ben finished with, that drone strikes are ethical and effective because there is no alternative, or that the alternative is even worse. So that QED, drone strikes, drone warfare, must be ethical because it's the lesser of two evils. Now, over the last decade, we've seen a rapid rise in the use of drones for many reasons, but primarily because their ability to be operated remotely at great distances and their ability, as Ben says, to loiter over particular areas for hours or days or even sometimes weeks in shifts. Now, some people argue that drones are in effect no different from other remote weapons like cruise missiles or long-range bombers or even the longbow. We've been told that essentially there is no difference. But there is a very great difference in the fact that these drones can operate at great distances from across the continent, from different continents indeed, and, as Ben talked about, loiter looking for targets of opportunity, looking for suspicious behavior. And the problem is that these armed, unmanned systems make the option to resort to lethal military force much easier. Indeed, I believe they make it too easy. And on the one level, as Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Killing called it, there's the idea of the PlayStation mentality, the notion where the geographic and psychological distance between the pilot, the operator, pressing the button, and the target is so great that it kind of lowers the threshold of what's actually happening, and rather than seeing flesh and blood, you see pixels on a screen. Now, I know that there are many in the military, both the US and the RAF, who vehemently object to this idea and say that these are professional, highly trained individuals, and they can tell the difference between video games and real life. And also that there's a whole chain of command that pilots cannot simply just pick and choose when and where to launch their weapons. But the reality is that there is evidence of this PlayStation mentality. In 2010, a civilian convoy in Afghanistan was targeted in an airstrike by drones, and 23 civilians lost their lives, men, women, and children. And in the subsequent investigation, US military investigation, they found that one of the primary causes for that tragedy was the bias/propensity of the Predator crew to kinetic operations, as they called it. That the Predator crew wanted an attack to happen, and you can read in the transcripts, they're on the web, that there were troops on the ground. There are other intelligence analysts looking at the video feed who were saying, this does not look like a hostile target. But the Predator crew at Creech ignored those concerns and went ahead because they wanted an attack to happen. So although this is one case, it can never be conclusive, there is evidence of this PlayStation mentality, and we need much more information about the day-to-day use of drones. But the bigger problem is that this kind of drones give our political leaders this, quotes, bias/propensity towards kinetic attack. And in modern times, really, there's a real political cost to launching overseas military intervention. The potential footage of grieving parents awaiting the body bags, the coffins of their sons and daughters sent overseas by politicians is a real restraint on our political leaders. It's a real kind of they do not want to do that. But if you take that political cost away, if you take that restraint away, it makes it much easier for politicians to try to solve problems by using lethal military force rather than the kind of messy political, diplomatic, long-term solutions. And although we are very early on in the drone war era, the US has already launched drone strikes, as we know, in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Pakistan and Yemen, in Somalia and Libya, and there is also evidence of US drone strikes in the Philippines and Mali as well. When it comes to the UK, so far the UK has only used drone strikes in Afghanistan, although RAF pilots piloted US drones in Libya. But when the French military intervened in Mali recently, there was huge pressure on the government to also send drones to be involved in that military intervention. And it was the sending of British drones to Mali was only prevented by the Defence Secretary insisting that the British drones were too busy to go to Mali. But when we acquire new drones, we're about to double the number of drones that the UK has. That each time a crisis blows up, there will be more pressure to intervene, to send our drones, because there is no perceived cost in doing so. So drones are different weapons from other weapons because they lower their capability lowers the cost of engaging in lethal military action and swings the balance away for politicians engaging in political solutions. The second argument that I want to make is we mustn't be fooled by this rather Hollywood idea of pinpoint precision airstrikes. As I said, it's like the reverse version of the Rapture, where we can just take away the bad guys and leave innocent civilians behind. The reality, there is no such thing as a pinpoint accurate airstrike. There's no such thing. And it's not just me who is saying that. 2 weeks ago, I went to the launch of a new report on precision weaponry at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. It's a kind of think tank of the MOD. And their senior government military commanders were saying the same thing. Yes, of course, weapons are much more precise now than they were when we were carpet bombing Germany, when it took 1,000 bombs to be sure that one bomb would hit a particular target. Yes, of course, drones are more precise than that. But the idea that we have that drone warfare can kind of take out a particular individual or a particular car with no collateral damage at all is nonsense. Anyone who knows about airstrikes and knows about blast radiuses, knows about circular error probability, knows about how the weather can infect particular airstrikes, knows that there is no such thing as pinpoint airstrikes. And I think lots of people think drones are ethical because in their mind they associate drones with pinpoint accuracy. And if you think like that, think again. Finally, I want to challenge what Ben said there at the end, that the argument boils down really to the fact that it's ethical and effective because there isn't anything else. As Leon Panetta, who was the CIA, head of the CIA, said, it's the only game in town. And I think a wise man once said, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And now that we have drone technology, the solution to every problem is a drone strike, and that's a real problem. And the suggestion that drone strikes or drone warfare is more ethical because other solutions, cruise missile strike, mass bombing, mass ground troop invasion would be worse, does not hold up, because on that ground you could say that chemical weapons and biological weapons are ethical because a nuclear option, if you can think of a worse option, therefore anything you want to do can be justified. So I urge you to reject this motion and reject the idea that drone warfare is ethical and effective. Thank you.